The Nutty Putty tragic accident. On November 24, 2009, a young father named John Edward Jones entered Nutty Putty Cave in Utah, expecting a short night of exploration with his brother and a few friends. He had explored caves before. He was careful, prepared, and deeply experienced. But just 1 hour into the journey, John made a fatal mistake. One that would trap him upside down in a space no wider than a microwave, nearly 400 feet underground. What followed was one of the most intense and breathtaking cave rescue attempts in modern American history. Dozens of trained responders worked for over 27 hours to save him. They brought in drills, rope systems, medical supplies, and sheer determination, but nothing worked. And John never made it out. This is the fatal breakdown of the Nutty Putty Cave tragedy. Nutty Putty Cave sits in Utah County, just southwest of Salt Lake City. Formed from limestone and mudstone, it stretches over 1,300 feet underground in a web of narrow corridors, dead-end tunnels, and drop shafts. For years, it had been a popular spot for amateur cavers, just looking for a challenge, but not a professional expedition. From the outside, it looks harmless, but the real danger lies inside. By 2004, the cave had already gained a reputation for trapping people. At least 6 known rescues had occurred, most of them involving people stuck in tight passageways who had been pulled out by rope or stretcher. The Utah School and Institutional Trust Land Administration eventually closed the cave due to safety concerns. But after local caving groups pushed for better oversight, it was reopened in 2009 with a new permit system, maps, and a stronger warning. John Jones wasn't a reckless thrill seeker. He was a 26-year-old medical student, home for the holidays to visit his family in St. George. He and his younger brother Josh decided to explore the cave together one evening before Thanksgiving. It was meant to be a short, nostalgic outing, something they had done often growing up in Utah. But just after 8 p.m., John entered a tunnel he believed was familiar. He was wrong. The tunnel John entered looked like the birth canal, a well-known squeeze in the Nutty Putty Cave that was tight but navigable. Experienced cavers used it as a test of skill, a place to crawl through with careful breathing and body control. But in the dim light, John had taken a wrong turn. Instead of the birth canal, he had entered an uncharted tunnel that sloped downward sharply and narrowed in a way that left no space to turn around. As he inched forward on his stomach, the walls began to close in. Still thinking it was a pass-through, John pressed ahead, hoping the tunnel would widen further in. It didn't. Within moments, he realized the horrible truth. He was stuck. His torso was wedged between the walls. His arms were pinned. And worst of all, his body was angled head first, at nearly a 70-degree decline. Gravity worked against him, forcing more of his weight into the crevice. He tried to push backward, but the slope and slick limestone made it impossible. Every movement drove him deeper. John called for help. Josh, still behind him in the tunnel system, heard his voice and rushed toward him. When he reached the edge of the squeeze, he saw John, nearly upside down, unable to move. His legs were exposed, but his chest, arms, and head were pinned below. Josh tried everything, pulling at his legs, repositioning his body, but nothing worked. The more they struggled, the more firmly John became trapped. Realizing this was beyond what they could handle, John squeezed out of the passage and crawled through hundreds of feet of winding cave to call 911. The first rescue team arrived just after 9:30 p.m., and so began a race against time. Rescuers from all over Utah were called in, firefighters, paramedics, search and rescue teams, and volunteers trained in cave extraction. Over 100 people would eventually participate in the effort to save John Edward Jones. But the moment the first responders reached the location, they understood the severity of the problem. John was wedged upside down in a vertical shaft about 10.5 inches wide and 18 inches tall, barely the size of an office printer. He was 6 feet tall and weighed 200 pounds. There was no room to turn him, no leverage to push him, and no space to rotate his body. His position was not just uncomfortable, it was life-threatening. When the human body is inverted for too long, gravity becomes deadly. Blood rushes to the head, fluid builds in the lungs, and the heart struggles to pump. Within a few hours, the body begins to shut down. John had already been upside down for over 3 hours by the time rescuers reached him, and the clock was ticking. Rescue coordinator Sean Roundy later said it was the most dangerous extraction he had ever faced. The team built a complex pulley system using ropes, anchors, and mechanical advantage devices. The goal was to attach lines to John's legs and slowly pull him up inch by inch, careful enough not to dislocate his joints or cause more damage. Miraculously, it started to work. Over the course of several hours, they managed to pull him back several feet, just enough to give him more room to breathe. His color improved, his breathing steadied. Spirits lifted. John even cracked a few jokes and prayed with the rescuers who had crawled in to comfort him. But then, just after midnight, disaster struck. A key anchor point bolted into the cave wall suddenly failed. The pulley system snapped, sending John sliding back down to nearly the exact position he started in, only now deeper and more compressed. The cave walls had won again. The setback was devastating. Hours of progress had vanished in an instant. The pulley system, built from ropes, cams, and the drilled anchor points, had been their best hope, and now it was useless. Worse still, John's body had endured additional strain. He had been yanked, twisted, and ultimately driven deeper into the crevice. The position was more extreme. His legs were bent, his arms were pinned tighter, and gravity pressed harder with every passing minute. John had now been stuck for over 12 hours upside down with almost no movement. Rescue teams rotated in shifts, crawling through the dark maze of tunnels to reach him. Some worked from the front, others from behind, trying to widen the passage by chipping away rock with power tools. The cave echoed with the buzz of drills, the cling of climbing gear, and the quiet prayers of those inside. Medics monitored John as closely as possible. They passed fluids and oxygen through a plastic tube, trying to keep him alert and hydrated. A monitor tracked his vitals. At times, his heart rate would stabilize. He stayed conscious for the long stretches, talking with rescuers about his family, his faith, and the future. He was determined to get out. He told them he had a daughter waiting for him and a son on the way. But his body was losing the fight. Blood had pooled in his head for far too long. His eyes were swollen. His voice grew weaker. He began slipping in and out of consciousness. Medics knew what was coming, but they refused to give up. They kept working through the night, even as fatigue set in and temperatures dropped. Some rescuers stayed in the cave for over 8 hours at a time, upside down themselves, risking their own lives to stay by John's side. As dawn broke over Utah on November 25, 2009, the rescue entered its second day. John had now been trapped for over 24 hours. Outside the cave, his family waited anxiously. His wife, Emily, pregnant with their second child, stayed in constant contact with the authorities. His father, Don Jones, was allowed to speak with him briefly through the narrow tunnel, offering comfort and strength. Those few words were heartbreakingly simple. "We're here. We love you. Hold on." Inside the cave, the rescuers were exhausted. Their bodies ached from the cold, their hands were numb, and the narrow tunnels had left many bruised and battered. But they pressed on. They brought in new equipment, heavier drills, stronger anchors, and began carving out additional rock in the tunnel wall, hoping to create enough space to free John manually. It was a risky plan, but it was all they had left. Every few minutes, A rescuer would call out to John, asking him to blink, respond, or squeeze a finger, but his responses were growing fainter. His body, inverted for nearly 26 hours, was shutting down system by system. The effects of gravity, blood pressure, and internal swelling were overwhelming even the best efforts of the medical team. Just after midnight on November 26th, John Jones went silent. A medic crawled in, checked for a pulse, and found none. He was declared dead inside the tunnel where he had fought for his life for more than a day. The official cause? Cardiac arrest due to prolonged inversion and positional asphyxia. In simple terms, the position had killed him. And now, there was one final excruciating question. Could they bring his body out? The answer was no. John's body was now wedged deeper than ever, in a tunnel so narrow and angled that even the rescuers who had reached him alive struggled to get back out. Attempts to extract his remains would involve widening the tunnel drastically, risking further collapse, injury to rescue teams, and possible death. The structure of the cave had already been weakened by drilling and shifting during the rescue. To go further meant gambling more lives. After long deliberation, John's family made the impossible decision. They would leave him there. Just a few days later, Nutty Putty Cave was sealed permanently. Welded steel gates were installed, and the cave entrance was filled with concrete. John Jones would never be brought back, but he would never be forgotten. A memorial plaque now stands at the cave site, honoring his life, his courage, and the dozens of brave souls who risked everything to try and save him. He left behind a wife, a daughter, an unborn son, and a family who later said that even in his last moments, John never stopped believing in rescue. Today, when you hear the name Nutty Putty Cave, it's not spoken with excitement, it's spoken with silence, with weight, with memory. Because that cave took a man who did everything right, who prepared, who planned, who loved his family, and still it did not let him go. That is the story of the Nutty Putty Cave tragedy.